Anyway, I want to say hello to Louise, and Louise, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you everybody who's here for joining us, and we hope you will enjoy what you hear. You know, our roots in my family go back in Woodhaven a long, long way. Ernie and I have been here for 50 years, but my grandparents emigrated here to the States and they settled in Woodhaven. And my mother was born in Woodhaven, about 2 blocks from Nears, and she grew up there, went to St. Thomas's. She married and moved away, but my Aunt Helen stayed in that house on 88th Avenue, and we visited many times as children. So our roots go quite a ways back in this community. And when Ernie and I were going to buy our first home, and it became Woodhaven, it felt to me like I was coming home, even though I had never lived here before. And we just love the community, we love the people. The businesses are ancient and old and familiar, and some of them before my mother went to. So it's Woodhaven. It's Woodhaven.
You have your roots here. Now, what I found interesting when we spoke was that you talked about your grandfather, I think, was a tailor.
Yeah, my mother's parents were tailors and dressmaker, and so the sewing gene was in the family. Although my mother was not a sewer, she often lamented that it skipped her generation. But I sewed, and one of my first toy gifts was I was about 9 or 10, was a model toy functional sewing machine. And she would give me an old dress and some used shirts and whatever, and I would try to make dolls' clothes, and they were absolutely horrible. They never fit the dolls. There were no patterns. I had no way to learn it, and my mother wasn't able to teach it. So I messed along for quite a while, having fun with it. But it wasn't until I was married and an adult that I started serious sewing and made my children's clothing, made much of my own when I went to business, and serendipitously fell into quilting by going to a quilt show and realizing that that's where I belonged.
Tell us a bit about that, because I found that really interesting. How you really had one artistic endeavor going for a long time, and then you switched, and it was a definitive switch. What you told me. It
was. I was looking for a new sewing machine, and I went to a quilt show where I could try out a number of models. And when I went to the quilt show, there was a whole section on women's first quilts. And when I looked at those, I was so overwhelmed. I thought, I could do this. This is much more fun than making clothing. And I just jumped right into it and never made another garment, and have been making quilts for like 19 years, 18 years now. And learning more with every quilt. There's new techniques to learn. There's new designs to learn. It's always a learning experience. It's always an artistic experience and a stretching of the capability. And that's where it is. It was purely by accident. Had I not gone to that quilt show, I might not have done it. I don't know what would have inspired me to do that.
It's amazing. You never know when your life's going to change like that, right? I mean, that's remarkable. Now,
but in a really good way. In a really good way.
Now, before we start this presentation, it might just be helpful if you can explain to folks, what exactly is a quilt and what is quilting.
Okay. Well, a quilt is basically a textile sandwich. It's a pieced top. It's a piece of batting in the middle, and it's cloth on the back. And the quilting itself is sewn through those 3 layers, which then becomes a quilt. So that's the simplest explanation of what a quilt is. And many people who are listening may have quilts. They may have gotten them from their moms or their grandmothers, or bought them at a raffle, or won them at a raffle, or picked them up at a rummage sale or a church bazaar. Quilts are absolutely everywhere. So if you found one and it has found its way into your care, treasure it, because some woman spent time and love and care in making it, and it's worth all the care you can give it.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, I think let's hop in and let's.
Okay, this is where I work, and I will say right off the bat that it never looks this neat. And unless every once in a while, maybe once a year, I absolutely clean it up of all the remnants of all my projects and start with a clean slate. If I had been taught as a child to make simple strips like this and sew them together, I might have started quilting a lot earlier than I did. Anyway, this is the room. It's great. It's got a lot of natural light. Ernie has these over table lamps, which gives me great light if I'm working in the evening, which I often do. So it's a wonderful thing. And on the wall to the right, I don't know if you're seeing my arrow. Is anybody seeing my arrow? Ed, are they seeing?
Yeah, we're seeing it. Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, on this wall here, which you'll see later on, there's a huge, it's a design wall. It's two felt lined plastic tablecloths from the dollar store that I sewed together and hung up on hooks because cloth sticks to felt and it's a great way to work designs. So we're going to start moving down now. My first quilt. This is the first quilt I made, and I was advised, oops, I shouldn't touch this thing at all. I was advised to do something very simple, very straightforward, straight lines, nothing complicated. And I have always loved this first quilt. It's earth tones. I did it by making what we call strip sets, 6 strips of 1.5 inches sewn together, and then of 2 different colorways, and then chopping them into 6-inch blocks and arranging them this way. And if you squint a little bit, you can see that there's steps. The little white lines draw your eyes up to the right, and there's a sense of motion with that. It's a very simple quilt, but it gave me a lot of confidence, and it inspired me to do more challenging things. So that was my very first quilt. Okay.
Very, very nice.
Okay, now landscapes are not just the purview of painters. People carve them in wood. They solder them in metals. They use all kinds of materials, and I use textiles. I put the little pieces on a backing fabric, and I arrange a lake and some rocks and some filigree grass and a tree and sky, and it all comes together. And the quilting itself, I think in this picture, you can see the actual quilting. So making waves in the water and making up in the sky, it's kind of swirls of moving air. And in the rocks, it's kind of just jumpy for rocks. And that's the quilting part.
Yeah, it really does add a lot of texture to the,
it does. And I also use heavy yarns between the various layers. To separate them and give them more texture. And all that grass on the bottom is all just sewn in. So you could kind of, it's like a fringe. It's all loose and you can kind of play with it a little bit.
Oh, very nice.
And there's a second one I did, which is a lighthouse scene. And again, you can see the quilting here too. And the air is kind of floating around and each one is different, and using pebbles and larger rocks and finding fabrics that make the image of the thing you're looking for. That's part of the challenge and part of the fun. And I just had fun doing these. It was just something that I always wanted to try.
It's beautiful.
Okay, let me just see a little more detail. I liked having the grass sticking out of the rocks there. I thought,
yeah,
I'd give it a little bit of 3D feature. Mandala. Now, this was a project I did with my daughter, Nikita, who lives in Denver. And we set upon designing our own quilt, which is really tough, especially we want to do a great circle. So we designed on graph paper with pencils, all kinds of designs, and it took us a while. We were laughing a lot, and finally did come up with a design, and then drew it on a huge cardboard and to see if it would work. And then we did it on plastic templates and started tracing it on fabric. Now, when you make these pieces, you have to accommodate 1/4 inch around every side so that when they're sewn together, you get the size you actually want. And with all of these angles and all of these half diamonds, I was worried that it would never really come together. So she picked some really crappy fabric we had, and we made some model tests to see if the math would work, and it did. So we were really excited about that.
Have you always been good at math?
No. She's the engineer. She was the one who was good at that part of it. She was really very clever. And the one here at the top that has a line in it, this would be put on the fabric that you wanted to make a dead center, so it would create a mirror image. You'll see later on, I did that in another place as well. So here are the pieces that we made, and these were the fabrics that I chose. We had a big array of fabrics, and we each selected different pieces or different patterns for different pieces. So her mandala came out way different from mine, using all the same stuff. So so by putting it together, we hoped that when we actually sewed it, it would work. And this is the choice I made on mine. Okay. Somebody entered the waiting room there. And so this is how it came together. And did it work? Yes, it did.
Nice.
So these are 2 units together. And by making, I think we made 12 on this one. So here's 5 units together. And then we had to, so you can see how in the black, all the centers now become a huge circle of their own pattern, because each of the black ones are what's called fussy cutting, where you cut a precise pattern out of a big sheet of fabric as many times as you need for the pieces that you need. And also for the reds at the top, the same concept. They all have to be the same. And this is the finished product.
Wow.
So they make wonderful wall hangings, and it was our first effort trying to make a circle and have it come out right. And it was a little wonky and a little bumpy in some spots, but as one teacher told me, just iron it into submission. So that's what we did. And it hangs beautifully. And I was very proud of that project.
That is beautiful.
And one of the things I loved about it is that I did it with Nikki.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, here's another quilt that gives me another topic to talk about. And the topic is a focus fabric. Now this fabric on the top has all the colors of the greens and all the colors of the pinks and some cream colors, and that decides everything else. So you pick a fabric that has the pinks in a slightly smaller scale, and then another green one in another smaller scale yet, and you start thinking about how it's all going to work in a quilt. I wound up using a machine that is brand new in the last couple of years called a Go Baby. And there's a way of putting 6 or 8 folds of fabric on a template and rolling it through this machine. And you can see it makes all these diamond shapes for my quilt, and all the wedge shapes that go with it, precisely cut with all reference points for joining them meticulously. So now you can see this is how the blocks come together. Those little these are the little kites, and each of these is a square like this with 2 wedges on the side, and that becomes like a patch. And when you put 4 together, it becomes your block. And then the blocks come together like this. And I sashed it with those fabrics and put sashing. These green bands are called sashing, and these are called sashing blocks. And it becomes a, let's see if I can make this work. Okay, Ed, it's not advancing. So let me do this. And it becomes a quilt that looks like this.
Nice. That's very nice.
Nice and even. It's all over. It's very easy on the eyes. It's just the greens are just a wonderful color to work with. I do like working with greens.
What I enjoy about this too is, and you know, the process of what you're doing and that you're showing us is how we're starting down at the basic level and then pulling back. You know what I mean? You're pulling us back, and that's got to be really nice. Now, when you're at that early stage, when you're piecing them together, are you picturing what it looks like at the end? Is that what you're?
Usually I do, because I get my pattern ideas from books or magazines, and I can see what the end product is supposed to be. So that becomes easy. And also the books and magazines have very meticulous instructions about the shapes, the cutting, the sizing of each patch. So if you cut accurately and you sew carefully, all your intersections should match. Your points should come out without being chopped off at the ends or blunted or sticking out. So it's a question of patience and care. Okay, Ed, my thing isn't working for
All right.
Up and down. We'll go with the roller. This is a charity quilt, and I belong to an organization in Manhattan called the Empire Quilters Guild, and they have a charity table there. And this group, by the way, makes hundreds of quilts a year for all kinds of charities in New York area. And they have a charity table. You can pick a fabric from that table, and you must make a quilt out of it and bring it back, and it becomes a quilt to be given away. So you can imagine which one was the focus fabric in this case, this wonderful floral, crazy, multicolor shape. So I just picked up that yardage and I brought it home and I went into my attic where I store my fabric stash, and I found the green and the deep teal and the cheddar color and the orange red color right out of that focus fabric. And by making squares like this top one up here is just a triangle of this fabric and a triangle of color. And by putting 4 squares together, I make a block. And then I alternate it. This is where playing comes in, where you take a block and you just flip it on its heels. I switch on this side to putting the solids in the middle and the patterns on the outside. And by alternating this row by row, it becomes this kind of very dynamic quilt. Now, if you squint again, you're going to see bands of color going up off to the right, the lighter, the lights in between the darks. It becomes like bands of light and dark.
Very nice.
So this became a quilt. It may have gone on the lap of a senior citizen somewhere in a senior home.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that I love about that. Okay. Okay, that's not going to work. All right, we're going to go this way then. Okay, a crazy quilt. Crazy quilts have a very interesting history. They were not made by the farmers and the homesteaders. They made quilts for absolute utility. These were made in the Victorian time when women had means, had money, and they had people to do all their housekeeping and people to do all their cooking and people to raise their children. And they devoted their time to learning music and painting and all the needle arts. And this is one thing they began doing with all of the fancy fabrics that came from their dressmaking. They had silvers and brocades and silks and satins and velvets, things that the poor women in the farms could never have had. So they started using this as a way to demonstrate and to practice their needle skills, and then wind up with a work that they could drape over a settee or a piano and just showing their work. And what's interesting about it is that traditionally the centerpiece, and you always start directly in the middle with something red or close to red. Okay. And then you start attaching pieces willy-nilly all the way around. And that always reminds me of what it must be like for a painter to put the first stroke of paint on a canvas. When you put that first shape down, it starts the whole thing going, and everything has to roll logically right from that. So you can see all of these have reds, either maroon or purple, deep purple, or reds right in the middle. And by attaching all these pieces, it becomes a quilt. And again, you pull out of the scrap pile. Quilters are very, very thrifty. They save all the scraps and they make strips out of them to save, and they make shapes out of them to save for future quilts. So I'll give you some examples of how. Let me see how this guy got to do this way now. These are just some close-ups of the work. They use laces and beads sewn on and buttons sewn on and charms sewn on and embroidery, like these little rows of embroidered flowers and these little buttons on top of buttons and all kinds of things just get put together. Yeah, these little sprays of flowers, bits of fancy ribbon, and all of it gets put together, and you wind up with a quilt that looks like that.
Wow.
And also, you're never sure when enough is enough. I kept this forever because I kept thinking, oh, I could do a little bit more in that one. Maybe that place looks just a little bit empty. Oh yeah, I know I have to put somewhere a spider web, because you have to have a spider web in your thing. So, and so you keep doing it until you say, all right already. You put it to bed. So that's my one effort. And I think most quilters make at least one of these. It's just okay. Tumblers. Here we go. Elizabeth, if you're watching, this was your quilt. Out of all my leftovers, I always cut this shaped tumbler, and I keep cutting up old scraps and leftovers from quilts, and I put them in baggies until I'm ready to have enough of them to make a quilt. So then I make a quilt by sorting them into colors and putting them not so randomly into rows. Now, there are quilters who will put all of their patches in a bag, and they will take the next one out and put it next to what they sewed whatever. They didn't care, and they called it a random quilt. But I think the best random quilts aren't random at all. The thought of what's next to each one has to have contrast, has to belong somehow, has to sit comfortably, like well-behaved children in a classroom. I'm not worried if when I join rows, I see two similar things here or two similar things here. That's not as important as the overall sense of harmony of all of these crazy patterns and colors fitting together. So now here, I put the rolls up on that wall I discussed before, and I can change rows out if I want to move them around, or because I don't use individual tiny pieces like this. These are about 4 inches by here, I guess, at 1.5 inches to maybe 3 inches, and this is 4 inches. So they're pretty small patches, but as it grows, it becomes a very, very lovely thing. And here's a close-up of how you can put crazy colors together, and they just work. It just fits. So and then this is the final quilt, which is just a sea of color. It's just color. And I found this wonderful variegated bric-a-brac, which I put on the edge of the top before the binding, the back, the border. And I'm just happy that quilt can fit in any kind of room. It can go anywhere. It's a wonderful quilt. Okay. So
All right.
One Block Wonders. Okay. Another outgrowth of the Quilters Guild in Manhattan is they have every 2 years a major quilt show. And we have part of that is a boutique where they have hourly or every 2 hours Chinese auctions of small pieces. So everybody in the club starts making a lot of small pieces. And this is the set I made one year. Just small pieces. And I had like this Asian thing going. I had all these Asian. I started with this very flower. I said, wow, that looks Asian. So I'm going to find something to go with it. And the next was this fabric. I said, wow, that looks really like it belongs. And then I had all these flowers on all these fabrics on my table, and I just lined them up until it made sense. And it became that little piece. And then I made, out of that same other fabric, I made this kimono.
That's beautiful.
And people love these little pieces. They just bought them up like crazy. And this one was really funny. I found this great big flower. It's about 6 inches in diameter, and it had surrounded by red. So it's sitting in my hands. And meanwhile, this yellow and green fabrics are on the table screaming, pick me, pick me. I want to be on that quilt. And how perfect is that? So I just created this quilt all from this inspiration from this one flower. I think it's a chrysanthemum. It's a wild thing. It's a beautiful
That's beautiful.
thing. And here's just a simpler one with just 2 colors and some iridescent fabric to just a little bit more glow to it. And this is all the last remnants of my greens and yellows. And then this was a crane that was cut out. This is a technique called applique, where you take shapes and you sew them carefully onto another background. It's another kind of a technique, which I think this was the first time I did this. And it's good to learn a new technique on a small piece, because if you really mess it up, it's no big trouble to throw it in the garbage. You don't feel like you're losing much. Okay, so now, okay. And this was my last Asian piece. I made this for Larissa, my daughter. She was drinking teas and wanted a wall hanging for her dining room wall. And so I found, again, this wonderful panel, and then a couple of ladies making tea and serving tea, and all these Japanese fabrics. And it was on her wall for many years.
Nice.
There you go, Larissa. Okay. Kaleidoscope Designs. Okay. Here we go. One of my very favorite, and probably my real favorite fabric designer, is Paula Nettlestern. And she designs sheet fabrics that are what they call bilaterally symmetrical. And there are many, many places in that wide stock of fabric that you can get mirror image pieces. So here this is one of her quilt designs. I took a class with her to learn how to do this. This is called 30-60. All of these lighter colored pieces are 60-degree triangles. And these green floral type pieces are 30-degree triangles. And by carefully matching the pieces, with an ending that looks great, you wind up with another design in the middle that just comes together. And that happens very, very often in this kind of quilting, where you get secondary and tertiary designs just by placing the same fabrics in a certain order. I have another one here. Here where this one, the star came together because all of these 60-degree triangles happen to have yellow caps.
Okay.
And so you can see how that works. And let me go. I'm having trouble with my roller. Here's another one where, again, if you squint, you can see this great big pink star in the whole middle, which is really part of all of the pieces that came together.
Wow.
This is the quilt that came out of that. I made 9 different versions of that 30-60 and just put them together in this wall hanging. You can ask questions, Ed, if you have any. That's good.
Right.
Okay. Now the next quilt, I'm just going to show a number of pieces where we would cut 4 exactly the same pieces by making plastic templates that you could see through, laying it on the fabric and tracing out the same exact 4 pieces. And then you take those 4 pieces and cut them in half or in quarters or in thirds, sew them back together in the same way. Then when you put them together, you get something else entirely different.
Wow.
It's like a quilter takes a piece of fabric, cuts it into 100,000 pieces and sews it all back together again. So these things happen, and you get these kinds of patterns, secondary patterns, primary patterns. And this is what the quilt becomes.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. That's nice.
Yeah, and it comes out almost looking like Spanish tiles, but it's really a lot of small pieces cut up. And the frame, this internal frame I put around it is all cut from the mother fabric. So I love this piece, and I love the class, and this woman that taught it, just Paula, was just a marvelous inspiration. And she said, don't worry about perfection. If you make a mistake in something this complex, nobody's going to see it. She really made it easy for us to plow ahead. And this is kind of how that works. You get a piece of fabric that has wild stuff all over it. And you can see here this piece of plastic template with a line down. I've drawn down the center of it. That allows me to center my choices. So you cut them out, and you make these trapezoidal shapes. They're like half hexagons. And then you get pairs of them. And if you think they look like butterflies, that's exactly what they are. They're meant to be butterflies. And they're all the same, except this guy here. I made a mistake, and I flipped one of them in the wrong direction. So they're the same, but they're not. So I was going to throw them out. And then I thought, nah, we're going for inclusion. So I thought, we're going to let this guy live in this quilt. So here's the quilt. This quilt is one of my favorite all-time quilts. And here's my little maverick.
There he is, right in the middle.
Right in the middle. I said, he's going to live with all these perfectionists, all these perfect butterflies.
It's like Bob Ross used to call it, like the happy little accident.
A happy little accident. Yep. Anyway, there's my happy accident. And I just thought he still belonged in that quilt. Not everybody is perfect. Okay, so that's that quilt. And okay, so now, another completely different kind of topic. Arrowheads. Now this is a lady named, let me get her name because she's a board. Her name is, hold on, I've got my notes here, Arrowheads. Anita Grossman came up with the way to cut fabric to make a very complex thing. And she has to be a mathematician because I don't know how else you know how to do this. 2 pieces of 8-inch squares face to face. You cut them on a diagonal. Then you cut 2 inches down one side and 2 inches across this way. So you wind up with a square here, a triangle here, and these 2 kind of other odd shapes. There's probably a name for them. I don't know what it is. You wind up separating them, and you get this pile. These 4 and these 2 open up. They're sewed together. They open up, and they iron out. And you wind up with these pieces.
Wow.
Just by the way you cut that. This is, to me, I was like, I got addicted to making these things, I have to tell you. So then you put them together, you sew this panel together and this panel together and this one, and you wind up getting the blocks. So I made 4 of these, and this is what that looks like.
Wow.
It's a stunning pattern, and you can make an entire quilt of the same ones, and it becomes a knockout. But I made a lot of small pieces with 4 of these blocks because I like giving them as little presents, so that people like these little presents. So here's another one. It really requires contrast. You definitely want to see where the line breaks are. And here's another one with a little warmer colors of wood and browns. And then I made so many quilts like this. But anyway, here's one of my favorites. All these fabrics come from a designer called Calf Fassett. He works and lives in a color environment. He's Scandinavian, designs the wildest colored fabrics. And I just love his work. So I was happy to make quilts with his stuff. Okay, next one, Amish with a twist. We're getting back to more American tradition. Okay, this is a take on the Amish quilts. Now, the Amish never used white. They never used patterned fabric. They always used solid colors. They tended to use dark colors and a lot of black. This one's a brighter one than they would make, but it's like an album quilt. Each block is different, which would allow those early quilt makers to show their growing knowledge of and techniques in making quilts. And so here are some of the different kinds of blocks that were made in this. And you can see the outline quilting, and it only shows up in the black. It doesn't even show up in the colors.
Yeah.
And this is and this one, you know, it's not a genuine Amish quilt because they would not have done applique. And this pattern called for making applique corners on this quilt. This one is on my bed right now. I love this quilt. And I always get pillowcases that are some of the solid colors in the quilt. So it's always fun. Okay, this next one I called Grace's Garden. My late sister Grace lived in Vermont, and she and her husband lived in a very large log cabin type house. And she had a garden. She grew every kind of fruit and vegetable you could imagine. And so I knew that she had to have a log cabin quilt made of fruits and vegetables. So I was collecting for years fabrics that had fruits and vegetables. And it took a while, but finally I managed to get enough to start making blocks. And this is the kind of block. This is a takeoff on a block that's called the log cabin. Usually starts with the red block at the hearth, the center of the house, the fireplace. And then you just keep adding pieces one at a time, size by size, until you finish it. And then I picked the little blueberries to be the sashing on it because they were the darkest and the tiniest one. And this is a little close-up of how it all came together. And this is the whole quilt. And Lucy, I know you're out there. I hope you're loving this quilt. I know you have it now. I love you, darling. And that's Grace's Garden.
God bless you. That's great.
Yeah, it was a wonderful quilt. And this is a related quilt. This I made earlier. This is a traditional log cabin quilt. And this is how you start. You pick your colors. In this case, I wanted to do black and white with tones of red in it. So I cut my pieces and I laid them out in a pizza box, and that's how I could keep it organized. It worked out great. And this is a technique called chain piecing. You start by sewing a little white square to the red square, one after another. You shoot them through the sewing machine, and you don't snip them apart till they're all done. Then you add this piece, and you do the same thing. Then you add this piece, and then this piece, and you do this with 80 blocks. Turns out and they keep growing and growing and growing until you wind up with a finished block. So you have black fabrics with white fabrics with black, and your heart of the home is in the little red square. So then this is one type of block that can be put together scores of ways. I was going to say hundreds, but I'm not sure about hundreds. There are books of all the ways you can do these quilts, and this is the way I chose to do it. It's called Lights and Shadows. I tried to lay them out so I would get that pattern. Let me show that back again. It dazzles. It's just the way all these patterns of the fabric work and jump and move. It's just got a lot of motion in it and a lot of life in it. Yeah. And this is it in our bedroom.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. We love that quilt. And here's one I made from my daughter, Nikita. She was having at that time a lavender bedroom. And on the side of her house that she had at that time was a whole wall from the curb to the back of her house of lilac trees. And it just was a stupendous display of flowers in season. So I made this quilt with thinking of all the greens and the lilacs. So again, this was 80 blocks. I think it's 80 blocks. And what I did in this quilt is I sewed them on the back of the patches. These are all the fabrics in that quilt. And I sewed each strip onto a block, onto a backing, so that all of it was pre-quilted. It's called quilt as you go. Mm-hmm. And then once I joined them together, I just treated them all with dark green grosgrain ribbon. So she has a two-sided quilt. So this is the top of it. And this one I used yellow. Apparently yellow is another acceptable heart of the house. Warm. Okay, that's that. Okay, next quick is from my niece, Nicki. It started with this flower right here. I saw that on a fabric and I said, oh my God, it's 6 inches big. You can't cut that up. You have to do something with it. So instead of cutting it up, I cut it out. And I had 3 of them in that yardage. Mm-hmm. So other things were happening with the fabric. So I picked blacks and reds, which is what her selection was. And I made these are called 9 patches, alternating the colors in these, and starting to put it together with using these as placed variously in it. Then to give it a little relief, I picked this fabric, which had just enough red and just enough black and just all these wonderful white flowers. To give some relief to the harshness of the red and the black. And this is the final on that quilt.
Very nice.
Yeah, that came out good. She was very happy with that. And this is the backing I put. I found a black and white and red geometric to just put on the back. Okay, Hunter Star. This one I'm going to start with the whole thing first, I think. This is a classic quilt. I like traditional patterns and classic patterns and just do maybe a modern take on them. I'm not much of an originalist, although I have designed some quilts. This one, I just picked up an entire array of black prints and another array of cream colored prints. And I had started out making them with just all the same red. And I thought it looked awfully flat. So then I decided to pick a whole array of different red prints. Mm-hmm. And when I did that came to life. It became to life. They seem to move and this is how they look. And again, this takes very precision cutting and very precision matching to get all of these points to work out. And this is just the border detail. But this quilt is just a fun quilt. So now here's a little error. I'm going to admit right here, this should have been right up there. But when from a galloping horse, nobody can tell. Try to find the error.
yeah, right. Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, hexes. Okay. Who would think that you could make a quilt out of polka dots and stripes and flowers and this wild other thing at the top? But this all came in a set. And I said, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with this? So I went through books and I found something I could do with it. I cut it up into pieces that required pieces according to the pattern, which required cutting a central octagon. So I cut these out of one fabric, which would kind of go with a lot of this. Wasn't sure how it was going to work out, but it did. And I made hexagons by putting the flower in the middle, surrounding it by the light color, and surrounding it outside by one of the darker prints. And I made a whole lot of those. And then by putting tan triangles in the middles.
Oh yeah, you know the triangles.
You have to join them. And how do you join hexagons? With triangles. And that's the quilt that came out of that.
Nice.
Yeah, so this was a fun quilt. I really like it. Oh. New York Beauty. Here we go. Sorry, I hope I'm not making anybody dizzy with this.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great, Louise.
Okay. This is a technique called paper piecing. It's the first time I tried to do it, and we had an excellent teacher. Her name was Han, and she came and taught us this. This is, you print out a pattern on your printer, and you need to print out as many copies of this in a printer as you can. It's sort of a part paper, part cloth, and you sew a patches onto it, trim off the excess, sew on the next patch, trim off the excess, and keep going. Here's my patches of the dark and my patches of the light fabric. And you make these little crowns with the points. The only way to really get these kind of points is with paper piecing. It's foolproof. And when you want to have that kind of perfection, you need to use this technique. It's a little tricky, but with a good teacher, you just get it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and see, this is how we finished. I finished all of these, and then I cut the frames that would go around the outer curve, and these quarter rounds that would go on the inner curve, and I made a whole mess of blocks. And these are the blocks that came with that. So I started laying them out, and there's so many ways, again, you could play with this, but I thought you can't just put them all in the same direction. You have to do something a little bit fun. Before I go there, here's a detail of how this all comes together. And then I made a round one. I turned 3 of them around,
Okay.
and I made a circle in the middle. And this became, then I found my border. I couldn't believe in my stash I had such a fabric that could not have been more perfect for this shape to find these little crowns. It was just a little quilter's miracle. And here's the finished quilt.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love how you didn't go for like the obvious circle, like right in the center this time too. It's nice. It's like offset up high a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you play with them all and you find out what's, and then finally something says, stop, you've got it, you know, and
that's nice.
And you just do it. So I've had that one in a couple of shows. That's been around. This one I made for my sister Rita and for her marriage to Christine. This was her wedding quilt. And okay, Sylvia's just entered.
I got it.
You got it.
I got it.
Okay. Okay, this was, hold on, I'm going to find the name of the person who did it. Jean Nolte was the designer of this quilt. I got it in a book. And it was all squares of batik. Now, most people know fabric when you buy it. It's printed on the top of the cloth. So there's definitely a right side and definitely a wrong side. In batiks, there's no wrong side. There's always, it's dyed right through the fabric, so you can use it at either side. But I found this bunch of these fabrics. There are no two different ones. They're all unique ones. And I look at this as my sister quilt people who do all this dyeing in Indonesia. They do magnificent work. And so I made 2-inch squares and 4-inch squares and bands of purple. I don't know why purple, but it was just purple. And then I made this bedspread. And this required unbelievable attention to precision. Otherwise, the points would not have ended where they should end. And it would have been a wreck, but it came out great. And I was thrilled to give it to my sister Rita. Hey, Rita, love you, kiddo. And she was the flower girl at my wedding, one of my younger sisters. And she has this quilt. Bright squares. Okay, here's another. Okay, this is kind of closer to the end. Let me just do something different here.
Sure.
I'm going to show you the end first. Because this was a whole bunch of solid squares of many colors. So to make it more interesting, I put triangles of different colors on the ends and cut off all the extras. Then I had all this pile of extras, so I made these little guys, and then I made, out of 4 of those, I made these fellows. So then I had this color that had every single color in it, which was a great little border thing, and created a border. One way to take a simple quilt and turn it into a great quilt is to make a very dramatic border. So this quilt is really, I love this quilt. I love the colors. I love how it is. And I love black, and black is such a strong bond for this. I just love this quilt.
This is beautiful.
Okay, QOV, Quilt of Valor. A big thing in the quilting world is giving quilts to veterans and families whose children are in the military. And on our block, we have a couple David and Karen Tinsley, who have 3 sons, all of whom are in different branches of the military. So one Christmas, I decided to make their family a quilt of valor. So I found every single red, white, and blue thing I had in my stash. My stash, by the way, is my attic. That's my store where I go shopping for fabric. It's already in the house. So I found all of these wonderful fabrics, and I made these 6-inch blocks, just very, very simple 6-inch blocks of various, and this I found was a great fabric to make the back of American flags. And then by putting all the blocks together, stripes and polka dots and stars and solids and bubbles and everything, it became this quilt.
Nice.
So she cried when I gave it to her. She was so happy with that quilt. So quilters do this sort of thing. They give away, they just give. And you know, when you do that, it's a very warm and heartful thing to do. A lot of my quilts are out in the world. They're to family I've given them to. They're to people who've won them at auctions, friends I've given them to, people who've bought them, and the charity ones who go to people I don't even know. And it's a great thing to know that they're out in the world making people happy. That's
do you put a label on them with your name, like a signature?
I do. I put the name and the date.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good point, because when you go to quilt museums and quilt exhibitions, what you see most often on the little index card next to the quilt is maker unknown. Maker unknown. So the mantra today is get your name on that quilt, because someone you give it to today will have children, and then they'll have grandchildren, and if you're lucky and the thing survives, somebody will know who made it. And they say, everybody signs a painting.
Yeah.
Sign your quilt. You know? So I do. I put labels on the back.
Very nice.
Now, this was a crazy little thing. This was a very small quilt, but it was very complicated. And the instructions said, trust me, make a chart. Okay, I'm going to trust them. So I made a chart of the order that I wanted the leaves to fall. And this chart told me in order which pieces came from which. Now, each pile has 6 pieces. They're all different. And each one borrows pieces from the other one next to it. So you have to have a chart to know what to do. And nobody can go in the room. You don't open the window. Nobody can sneeze, because if they blow out of order, you're a dead duck. So here's my tray of pieces. And this is how they come together. You can see that they have to squeak into each other's territory, so to speak. And this a border fabric, by the way, I found in my stash, all these wonderful leaves. So this is a table piece we put on our table in the fall every year.
I love that. I love the way it overlaps the white on the edge there.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, they didn't show to do that. I decided I could do that. I decided not to sew it down. I left it up so it could be like like it gives another dimension.
3D, it gives depth to it. Absolutely, that's great.
It's cute. Yeah. Okay, Pinwheels. This one is for Bruce and his late wife Martha. She was decorating her bedroom over, and she had these colors, or some of these colors, and I happened to be making a quilt in those colors. So I said, okay, she's going to get this quilt. This is another tricky one, because if you can look at this is the block right here, and it has 4 different colors, and the colors have to join with this one and join with this one, but not this one and not this one and not this one. So when you lay this out, oh my God, you just have to kill anybody who goes into your studio.
It's like a Rubik's Cube or something.
It's something like that. But it was clever. It was very clever how they walked you through how to do it. So will I make another one again? Not likely. But anyway, there's the quilt. It's just an accent piece in their bedroom. And I loved making it, and I loved giving it to them.
Beautiful.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end. This is my little machine. This shows it a little bit better because it shows the pattern of the piece I want to cut. And you can see on the edges these little reference notches that they have. So I can put tons of folds of this fabric, 6 or 8, and put another piece of vinyl on top of it, and you crank it through the machine, and you can make 6 or 8 of these at a time in like a half a minute.
Wow.
So this is an enormous time saver. So in this, it's a 1-block quilt, and it's a riot of color. It's my Scandinavian fellow and I just love his colors. And this is the quilt that came from that. Oops, there it is. And it's just color, 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 color. And I've made a binding for it that I have not finished this one yet, but it's careful cutting and those precision notches made it very, very easy to have every intersection land where it belonged.
Now before that machine, you'd have to cut them all
Yes.
by hand.
Yes, and you would have to cut them individually because they're curves, and you'd have to use a plastic template and cut around outside curves and inside curves and outside curves. What that does to your shoulder, I got to tell you. You know, I'm not getting any younger, 77 and pushing it. You know what I mean?
Oh, God bless you.
So anything that can help make it easy, I welcome it. I welcome it. So, and then, all right, so 5 easy pieces. This is what quilters do when they have so many leftovers that it's disgusting. You take the whole bin of leftovers and you throw them out on the table and you start putting them on backing cloth, and you just start making quilts out of the leftover strips. And these make wonderful little pieces. I call them 5 easy pieces. Here, this is one that's kind of like a undecorated crazy quilt. And this one like a spindle. And because so many points had to come together in the middle, I will refrain from describing what that middle intersection looked like.
So you covered it up with that little
I covered it with it's called a yo-yo. It's made just for this kind of situation. and talk about ironing it into submission. This was definitely one example of that.
Hey, whatever works, right?
Whatever works. Yep. And I have that hanging in my basement. Then of course this is another version. You just do all kinds of little versions of this. Using up all the scraps. And they've been given away, or people pick them up, or I donate them to little events at my women's club or at the Quilters Guild. You give them to your housekeepers. You give them to the people in the bakery. You just give them to people just to say thank you.
Sure,
and they like it. They like it. Okay, this piece is more crafting than quilting, but it's partly quilting. These are bookmarks, and I've made dozens and dozens of these. You take 3 pieces of very highly contrasting fabrics, and then you cut notches in such a way that you can draw the back one around and over the front one that reveals the third one. So hold on. This shows you a little bit better how this works. And so I loved making them. I was making them over and over and over again. And then you use the decorative stitches on the sewing machine to sew around it and trim it off with pinking shears, and you give them, whenever I give somebody a book, I give them a bookmark. So, and that's probably more craft than quilting, but it came out of a quilting workshop. Okay, and here's my little coffee cozy. This was my own invention. We would get tired of having our second cup of coffee cold from the French press, so I came up with this idea of making, they have tea cozies. Why can't you have a coffee cozy?
Sure.
So I lined it with a thermal. There's a thermal product you can make for when people make pot holders or other products that need to be insulated. And so it's reversible. There's another different color of red inside, and keeps our coffee nice and hot. And playing. We discussed playing and moving around blocks. And I wanted to show you an example. This is one block. These are 4 blocks put together. You can see the seams here where this is. Then if you take the same block and you flip those outside in, you get this. And that's, to me, part of the artistic magic in quilt making, because you can make almost any block can be made to have many different lives. And here, Ed was kind enough to put these side by side. It's exactly the same pieces.
Amazing.
And yeah, so that's fun. It's really fun. And I just love doing that when I'm making a quilt, to just see what the possibilities are, and then picking the best of usually several good possibilities. Okay, and these are just some quilts. I'm not going to talk too much about them. This is called an Irish chain. I gave it to my nephew Michael and his wife to be for their engagement. She's Irish lass, so Irish chain was good for them. This one I made for Larissa's home. First time I did curves, which was interesting. Another new technique to learn when I did this one, and changing the scale here and there, plugging in smaller pieces. And the moon up here is a doily that was made by Larissa's great grandmother, Ernie's grandmother, who taught Larissa how to crochet. And I thought, as an homage to great grandma, we'd put that in this quilt. And I think it sits there quite happily.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That has a very marble effect to it. Looking at it, you know, it's
the fabrics. These are they're very muted fabrics. Yeah, it's just, but then by putting some black and blue in there, it punches it here and there a little bit. And this one I made, I donated that for Women's Club auction, and the lady who won it was thrilled. Whoops, got to go back because all of these flower pieces are kaleidoscopes. They're cut pieces that were put together until I found the way that it looked best. And this was that quilt. This is another one. These are called flying geese. I've made a couple like this. I made one like this for my sister Anne and one for a friend in Florida. Karen, if you're listening, this is yours. So hope you're still happy with it. Anyway, that's a fun one with just random colors. And this was another one with, this one wasn't scraps. This one was, I selected all kinds of plaids I had and cut the plaids because I just thought you need a masculine quilt once in a while. And this was it. So, and somebody bought this at a show I had. And this one is another one called Braids, and it's luminous, the way you go from dark to light, and it just, the color just looks like it's illuminated. And I don't know why that, oops, let me go back. Here it is. Why that happens, but everyone who makes this gets that same feeling of it looks like there's a lamp behind it. And, it's just a question of the selection and the very gradation when you go from the dark brown to the light brown at the middle there.
It's definitely an optical illusion too, because some of those pieces, they look lighter in the middle than at the edges, but when you look closer, they're not. It's just,
they're not. They're the same. Yes, they are. They're the same. So, and so that was another piece. And I think this is the very last, almost the last one. This is another one of the same pieces I did before I had that machine. This I made gave it to my grandson in California, and he had that. And this was all with baby prints. So it's a completely different quilt than that bright red quilt. And see the difference you can make just by changing your selection of textiles. And this one is the last of my fussy cuttings. I got another Paula Nadelstern fabric, which was all kinds of stars, and I cut stars and pieces of stars and putting in sashing. And to me, it kind of looks like you're looking through a leaded glass window into a starry night. And I do love this quilt. So they're all, and I think, ladies and gentlemen,
I think that's it.
This is the end of the show.
Louise, that was fantastic.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you.
You know, I really love you know, looking at these, because you know the shapes and the patterns. There's a regiment to it. It's like I said, it's a pattern. It's so similar, yet within it, it's so wildly different. And that was really great to see. You know, from the small pieces to the big, and looking back and forth. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
And there's endless variety. What's nice, you never can get tired of it, because every quilt is another journey, another color scheme, another pattern scheme, another technical challenge. It's always something exciting. So New York, we can look at people now, can't we?
We can look at people now. I'm going to
okay.
I'm going, let me do this now. I'm going to allow people to.
If anyone has questions, I'll be very happy to try to answer them.
And now everyone can start unmuting themselves and putting their cameras on and say hello. And everybody, as you come on here and you take your microphone off, we're gonna
thank you, everybody. Thank you.
That was really wonderful, everybody. The floor is yours. Say hello.
Okay, anyone has questions? Hi, Elizabeth. I see my sister Elizabeth in Wisconsin. I have family from California to Maine here today.
How long did they take to make?
I'm sorry, I need this question.
How long do they take to make?
Too many people talking at one time.
It depends on the complexity. It depends on, of course, the size. Some of them are very technically challenging, and I have to slow down because I'm an Aries. I tend to go like gangbusters, and I need to take it slow and careful to get the right result.
So the longest one was?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure who's talking. I'm not sure I'm hearing the question.
Why don't you tell her what trouble?
I don't know why we have an echo.
I'm going to put gallery. I want to see more people.
Oh, Louise, I wanted to let you know.
Hi, Deborah. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, honey. I loved your presentation a couple of weeks back.
Well,
Great.
thank you. And yours was so beautiful as well.
Thank you,
I
honey.
love all the colors that you use. You know,
Thank
they really draw your eye. And I heard a couple of songs, you know, when I was looking at some of your work, especially the Crazy Quilt,
Yeah.
it kind of reminded me of Dolly Parton's Coat of Many Colors.
Uh-huh.
The way it's like all put together from all
Yeah.
different random
From the
things.
scraps.
But it symbolizes, you know, an act of love, an act of caring, just like the
Yeah.
quote in the song, just like.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I just saw a thing on her. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Louise,
Yeah. Hi.
do you work on more than one quilt at a time, or do you have several going at once?
No, I one at a time.
One at a time?
Well, when I finish a quilt's top, I sometimes put them aside and I don't finish it as a quilt.
Sure.
But I would find it too confusing to have too many things happening at once, because there's sometimes hundreds of pieces in a quilt top. And if I were working on more than one thing at a time, I think I would, I wouldn't be answerable to my behavior.
Lee, can I ask you something?
Sure.
A couple of years ago, I was on a riverboat cruise in Ohio, and in Paducah, Kentucky.
Oh, God, yeah.
Have you ever been there?
No, I have not. And it's on my bucket list to get to Paducah, because that is quilter country.
It's really amazing, and they have
Yeah.
a competition.
I know they do.
Entrants come from all over the whole world.
I know, and I've seen those competitions, and as good as I am, I don't come close to what they do.
I don't know. I
Oh,
think
my God.
from here could compete.
But thank you. No, but the National Quilt Museum's in Nebraska, and but Paducah is considered the heart of the quilt world. It's great. And then of course you want to go to Gee's Bend to see the Gee's Bend quilts, you know, the ladies in the black ladies quilts in South Carolina. There are many different centers, and all worth the trip. But I urge people, if there's a quilt show or an exhibit in a museum, take the time to really look at them, see the detail of them, look at the quilting on them, and know that there's some lady whose name we will never know who took the time to make it.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you. They were all beautiful.
Thank you.
Hey, Lou,
Yeah, hi. Ginny, how are you?
I'm good. Where's the rest of the group?
I don't know. They all were coming, I thought, but you know, they'll maybe they can catch it on YouTube now.
Okay. Will it be on YouTube? 'Cause
Ed is gonna be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
fantastic, girl. Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great job, Liz. Really enjoyed it. Bruce.
Hey, Bruce, thanks.
So inspiring, Louise.
Jennifer, thank you,
I
honey.
can relate to everything that you said, and I'm in awe with every line that I felt. It was beautiful. My mouth is watering. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we have to have another breakfast soon, because we have to share. I didn't know that you did all that collage work, so that was a big surprise to me too. So we have a lot to talk about.
Yes,
Okay.
we do. Yes,
Great.
we
Thanks,
do.
honey. Thank you.
That's what I love to hear. You know what I mean? Seeing people starting to collaborate.
I have a question.
Yes, sure. Come on.
So I've seen on Facebook a lot of times that people are making quilts with t-shirts.
Yes, people, there is yeah.
Is this something that you're open to do?
No.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna pay you to do it.
The short answer is, I guess, no. I like the traditional quilts. I like the piecing. I like.
For me.
I have hundreds
I have
more
a lot of
made. And I don't really want to work with t-shirts, my own or anybody else's.
Okay, fair enough.
No, there's a
You-
lot.
you-
There are women who do great jobs, and they're good memory quilts. I know that women make them to send with their children to college, so they have memories of things, and it's a quilt that can be tossed around and thrown in the washer and dryer without worry too much. And it's a good way to use old shirts other than giving them away. Yeah, they also make quilts out of ties, because they're most are made of silk. And when you take apart a tie and open it up, it's quite a lot of silk fabric there. And people make wonderful things out of the silk. Ernie's retired, so I could just hit his tie rack, I suppose. And start something new, start a new thing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Louise. How long does it take you to make one quilt?
I would 100 or 2 hours. It depends on the quilt. Some of them are quicker because they're simpler. The complicated ones can take me weeks of work. It's hard. I mean, I have 6 quilt tops that are not made into quilts yet. They're called UFOs, unfinished objects. And one teacher told me, don't make it a quilt till you're going to give it away, because it takes a lot less room to store a quilt top than it does to have a finished poofy quilt.
Good idea.
And they're right, So, and the quilts that I have one attic bedroom that's a guest room that all the quilts are laying one on top of the other, the ones I cannot part with. So it's like the Princess and the Pea. The blankets are just built up. But
I see, I'm sorry, I see Larissa has her hand.
Larissa?
I had a question.
Yeah.
Are all the fabrics that you use woven fabrics? Are there any knits or stretchy fabrics, or are they all
They are all woven. The batiks are particularly tightly woven. There are ones that are looser woven. That one plaid thing at the end was, I forget what they call it, but it's looser woven. Had to be really, really careful not to get them warped out of shape and make the whole quilt wonky. But it's very hard to work with loose knits things, or things that stretch. That's why cotton is probably the most used. Some women quilt with silk and polyester. I stick strictly to quick cotton top, cotton batting, cotton backing, cotton thread. So when things get washed, theoretically, they will all shrink at the same level, because there is some shrinkage in these things.
Thanks.
Thank you, my love. Look what you're growing back here. Holy smokes.
Native bunch grasses.
Native sponge grasses. Okay. Looks good.
So you don't wash the fabrics first before you sew?
No, I don't. There's a big dichotomy in the quilt world. Some people do, most people don't. What I do is, if I have a fabric that I think will run in color, I cut a swatch of it off and I put it in a dish of boiling water. And if it stays, if the water doesn't turn color, I think I'm pretty safe. And according to the quilt museums, I'm told, quilts should be washed as little as possible. They should be vacuumed from dust, aired out, maybe hung out on a line, and that's all most of them will ever need, and they will last literally hundreds of years. So no, I don't pre-wash my fabric. If I'm making small pieces of thin fabric, I'll starch them to give them stiffness and steadiness, so I can so they won't miss shape on me. And I will always blame them. It will shape on me, not that I misshape them.
Oh, Louise, I saw that you used some iridescent fabric in some of your works.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do they ever make a glow in the dark type of fabric, or maybe like a holographic, sort of like a disco?
I haven't seen a holographic. I've seen all kinds of iridescence and sparkle in fabrics, and they can be used gingerly because they tend to be thicker, because there's metallic in them, and not as easy to work with. So I only use them occasionally as an accent. I don't really quilt with it, but I've never seen a holographic one. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think so. But like you said, it should be used sparingly, otherwise it would overpower the whole piece.
Oh, sure. You'd have to make a whole piece of it, and that would have to be the statement. Yeah, I would think.
All right, Louise, I want to thank you so much. This was really, this was a lot of fun. And it wasn't just fun tonight. It was a lot of fun working the last couple of weeks with you. And, you know, that's part of the collaboration process that we're seeing here.
And I want to thank you and the Woodhaven Cultural and Historical Society for giving me this opportunity to share my work and to share it with our neighbors.
Thank you so much. Well done.
Thank you.
For coming. I appreciate
It was awesome.